The Arizona sun beat down on the asphalt of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, making the air shimmer above the runway. To most people, it was just heat, a blinding, oppressive force. But to Captain Eva Rostova, it was home. She stood near the flight line, her hands tucked into the pockets of her flight suit, her eyes shielded by a pair of standard-issue aviator sunglasses. Her gaze was fixed on the ugliest, toughest, and most beautiful airplane in the entire United States Air Force, the A-10 Thunderbolt II. But Warthog. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't fast. It was built around a gun, a 7-barrel Gatling cannon that was longer than a small car. The plane was a flying tank, designed for one purpose: to protect the men and women on the ground. Eva understood that mission deep in her bones. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio where people looked out for each other. Her father was a steel worker, her mother a nurse. They taught her that strength wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about being the one who showed up when things got hard. Eva was the only female pilot in her A-10 squadron. She didn't make a big deal about it, and most of the other pilots didn't either. They were professionals. They judged each other on one thing: how well you could fly the plane. Eva was one of the best. Her call sign was Valkyrie, a name given to her by her first instructor, who said she had an almost supernatural calm in the cockpit. She was quiet on the ground, almost shy, but in the air, she was a master of her craft. However, not everyone on the base shared that professional respect. The friction came from the F-16 squadron, the Vipers, who shared their mess hall and briefing rooms. The F-16 was everything the A-10 was not. It was a fighter jet, a sleek, powerful machine designed for air-to-air combat and high-speed bombing runs. Its pilots were cut from a different cloth. They were top guns, full of swagger and confidence that often tipped over into arrogance. Their unofficial leader was Major Rick Gallo, Calcian hotshot. He was handsome, charismatic, and came from a family of decorated Air Force officers. He believed that fighter pilots were the tip of the spear, and everyone else was just there to support them. He especially looked down on the A-10s, which he called flying tractors or relics from a bygone era. One evening, at the officers' club, the tension that usually simmered just below the surface boiled over. Eva was sitting at a small table with her wingman, a young, eager pilot named Ben "Rookie" Carter. They were quietly nursing their drinks, going over a training flight from that afternoon. Gallo and his crew came in, loud and boisterous, fresh from a high-G training exercise. Gallo spotted Eva and sauntered over, a condescending smirk already playing on his lips. Well, if it isn't the Valkyrie herself," he said, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "I saw you out there today, puttering around the desert. Did you manage to not get lost?" His friends chuckled. Eva didn't look up. She just took a slow sip of her water. "We were practicing ground support, Major. It involves flying low and slow. You might want to read up on it." Gallo laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Ground support, right? That's what you call it when you can't keep up. Don't worry, when the real shooting starts, we'll clear the skies for you. Just try to show up before the fight's over, okay? We wouldn't want you to miss all the fun." He then looked at Ben. "And you, Rookie, you're flying with her. Be careful. Sometimes diversity hires are more about checking a box than checking a six." That was a step too far. Ben started to stand up, his face flushed with anger, but Eva put a hand on his arm, her grip firm. She finally looked up at Gallo, her eyes cold and steady. She didn't raise her voice. He didn't need to. "Major," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the noise, "my job is to protect our soldiers on the ground. Your job is to shoot down other planes. They are not the same. When a soldier is pinned down, bleeding in the dirt, he's not praying for a fighter jet he can't even see. He's praying for the sound of a Warthog. You'd do well to remember that." She stood up, placed a few dollars on the table for her drink, and looked at Ben. "Let's go, Rookie. We have an early briefing." As they walked out, a wave of whispers followed them. Gallo was left, standing there, his smirk replaced by a flash of anger. He had wanted to get a rise out of her, to make her lose her composure. She had refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, she had calmly and quietly put him in his place. It only made him resent her more. The only person who truly understood Ava's quiet strength was her crew chief, Master Sergeant Frank Sarge Kowalski. He was a veteran of 3 wars, a man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He had been working on A-10s since they first entered service. He loved the plane as if it were his own child. The next morning, as Eva did her pre-flight inspection, Sarge was waiting for her under the wing of her jet, number 237, Heard you had a run-in with Major Hotshot last night. Ma'am, he said, his voice a low rumble. Eve shrugged, running her gloved hand along a seam on the fuselage. He was just being himself. Some people think the shiniest toy in the box is the best one, Sarge said, wiping his hands on a rag. They forget that it's not about the shine, it's about the grit. This old girl, he patted the plane's landing gear, she's got grit, just like her pilot. Eva gave him a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Sarge. Just make sure she's ready to fly. She's always ready, ma'am, he replied. She's just waiting for you to tell her where to go. A week later, the entire base was buzzing with news. Deployment orders had come down. Tensions were rising in a volatile region of the Middle East, and American forces were being moved into position as a deterrent. Both the A-10 Squadron and the F-16 Squadron received their assignments. They would be deploying to the same forward operating base. The news was met with a mix of excitement and anxiety. For young pilots like Ben, it was the moment they had been training for. For veterans like Sarge, it was a familiar routine. For Eva, it was a chance to do her job for real. The rivalry with Gallo and his squadron was no longer a matter of banter. It was about to be tested in a place where the stakes were life and death. As Eva packed her gear, she thought about Gallo's smirking face. He saw her as a token, a weak link. He saw her plane as a joke. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The day of their departure was clear and bright. The heavy transport planes that would carry their equipment were already being loaded. The pilots would fly their own jets across the ocean, a long, grueling journey of aerial refueling and island hopping. Eva did her final walk around of Warthog 237. Sarge gave her a thumbs up. From the ground, she climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, the familiar smell of electronics and jet fuel enveloping her. The cockpit of the A-10 wasn't a sleek, glass and touchscreen affair like the F-16. It was a metal bathtub, a cage of titanium armor designed to protect the pilot from ground fire. It felt safe. It felt right. She strapped herself in, went through her pre-flight checklist, and gave the signal to the ground crew. The twin engines behind her whined to life. As she taxied toward the runway, she saw Gallo's F-16 pulling out of its hangar. He was on the same radio frequency. "See you in the sandbox," Valkyrie Gallo's voice crackled in her headset, dripping with condescension. "Try to keep the shiny side up." Eva didn't respond. She just pushed the throttle forward. The Warthog, heavy and powerful, rumbled down the runway and lifted into the blue Arizona sky. She was leaving the arguments and the insults behind. From now on, the only thing that would matter was the mission. She was heading into the fire, and she was ready. The desert was waiting. The forward operating base, Fob Griffin, was a patch of dust and concrete carved out of the vast, unforgiving desert of a country whose name most Americans couldn't pronounce. The heat was a physical presence, a wall you walked into the moment you stepped off the plane. The air tasted of sand, jet fuel, and a faint, underlying tension that never went away. This was the proving ground. Life on the FOB quickly fell into a rhythm of monotonous routine punctuated by moments of heart-pounding adrenaline. The days were long and hot. The nights were cool and filled with the distant, unsettling sounds of a country at war with itself. For Eva, the rhythm was familiar. Wake up before dawn, get the daily intelligence brief, plan the day's missions, fly, debrief, eat, sleep, and repeat. Her squadron, the Flying Hogs, shared a series of interconnected, tense and prefabricated buildings with Gallo's Vipers. The forced proximity did nothing to ease the tension between the two groups. If anything, it made it worse. The shared command center was a theater of professional rivalry. Gallo and his F-16 pilots were assigned the missions they considered glamorous. They flew high-altitude combat air patrols, or CAPs, keeping the skies clear of any potential threats. They conducted pre-planned strikes on high-value targets, using satellite imagery and intelligence reports to drop laser-guided bombs from miles away. Their missions were clean, precise, and, from their perspective, the most important work being done. In the daily briefings, Gallo would stand before the tactical maps and speak with an air of supreme confidence. "Viper Flight will be providing top cover for the entire sector," he'd announce. "We'll handle any real threats. Hog Flight, you'll be on standby for ground support. Try to stay out of the way." The A-10s were assigned what the fighter pilots considered the grunt work. They flew for hours in lazy circles over dusty roads, escorting convoys. They provided shows of force, flying low over villages to deter enemy activity. And they sat on alert, ready to be called in if ground troops got into trouble. It was slow, patient, and often boring work. But Eva knew it was vital. She and her wingman, Ben, flew their missions with quiet professionalism. They learned the landscape like the back of their hands, every wadi, every ridge, every cluster of buildings that could hide an ambush. They spent hours on the radio, not with other pilots, but with the soldiers on the ground. They learned the voices of the Army Rangers and Marine patrols they were tasked to protect. Those soldiers didn't care about air-to-air combat or high-tech fighter jets. They cared about the shadow of the Warthog passing over them. They cared about the deep, comforting roar of its engines. On the radio there was no condescension, only gratitude. Hog 221, this is Ranger Led. Thanks for the escort. It's nice knowing you're up there. A calm voice from a convoy commander would crackle. Appreciate the flyby, Valkyrie. Another voice. A young Marine JTAC, a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, said one afternoon. Things got real quiet down here after you showed up. You're our guardian angel. Eva would simply reply, glad to help. Stay safe down there. These small exchanges were the only validation she needed. She wasn't there to impress the fighter pilots. She was there for the soldiers whose boots were in the sand. One evening, she was in the small makeshift gym, working out the kinks from a long flight. Gallo walked in, a towel draped around his neck. He started his workout on a bench nearby, making a point of lifting a heavier weight than the man next to him. Heard you were scaring sheep again today, Valkyrie, he said, not looking at her. Eva continued her stretches. We were watching over a patrol in the Eastern Valley. They made it back to base without any trouble. I'd call that a good day. A good day, Gallo scoffed, racking his weights with a loud clang. A good day for me is taking out an enemy command bunker from 30,000 feet. That's making a difference. Flying in circles, waiting for something to happen. That's a waste of fuel. It's not a waste of fuel if it keeps one of our soldiers from stepping on an IED, Eva said calmly. It's not a waste if it makes an enemy fighter think twice about setting up an ambush. Whatever you need to tell yourself, Gallo said, turning to leave. Just remember who the real tip of the spear is around here. Eva watched him go, a familiar feeling of frustration mixing with resolve. She didn't need his approval. She just needed to do her job. Her resolve was strengthened by men like Sarge, who saw the whole picture. Sarge ran the A10 maintenance hangar with an iron fist and a fatherly heart. He and his crew worked tirelessly to keep the Warthogs flying in the harsh desert conditions. The sand got into everything, and the heat was brutal on the engines and electronics. Don't you mind him, ma'am, Sarge told her one afternoon as he supervised a repair on her plane's landing gear. Those fighter jocks, they live in the clouds. They don't understand the dirt. They don't understand what this plane means to the guys on the ground. He patted the A-10's rugged fuselage. They see an old, slow plane. I see a promise that we will never, ever abandon our own. Let the plane do the talking, ma'am. That BRRRT from its cannon speaks every language. Eva took his words to heart. She focused on her missions, on her flying, on the intricate dance of communication and coordination that was close air support. She felt a deep connection to the ground troops, an invisible thread that tied her cockpit to their fight on the desert floor. Then came the day when that thread was pulled taut. The call came in the late afternoon. A team of Green Berets, a small, elite special forces unit, had been on a reconnaissance mission deep in the treacherous mountains of the northern province. It was a place the pilots called the Hornet's Nest, a maze of steep canyons, narrow valleys, and hidden caves that had been an enemy stronghold for years. The Green Berets had been ambushed. They were pinned down on a narrow ridge, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. The enemy was well entrenched, firing from concealed positions in the rocks above and below them. They were cut off, surrounded, and taking casualties. The first call for air support went, as always, to the F-16s. Gallo and his wingman were on patrol nearby and were the first to arrive on the scene. The command center at FOB Griffin fell silent as everyone listened to the radio traffic. The voice of the Green Beret, JTAC, was strained, his breathing ragged. By per uno, menos uno. We are taking fire from all sides. They're dug in deep. We can't see them, but they can see us. Gallo's voice was cool and professional. Roger that. I'm coming in for a look. The FOB heard the sound of his F-16's afterburner as he made a high-speed pass over the area. There was a long pause. Viper 1-1. What's your status? The air controller at the FOB asked. I can't get a clear view, Gallo reported, his voice tight with frustration. The valley is too narrow and the friendlies are too close to the enemy positions. If I drop a bomb, I'll hit them for sure. It's a danger close situation. Too risky. I can't get a clean shot. You have to do something. The JTAC on the ground pleaded. We're losing men. My recommendation is to pull them out, Gallo said, his voice firm. Air support is not an option here. The risk of fratricide is too high. In the command center, the ground commander, an army colonel with a grim, weathered face, slammed his fist on the table. Pull them out. They can't move. They're surrounded. He looked at the faces around him, his eyes filled with a desperate anger. He saw the A-10 squadron leader, who was already looking at him, a question in his eyes. The colonel knew the risks. The A-10s were slow. They would be vulnerable to ground fire in those canyons, but they could fly low, they could get close. They could tell the difference between a rock and a soldier. He made the decision. He grabbed the microphone. His voice boomed through the command center, overriding all other chatter. Scramble the Warthogs, he ordered. Get me hog flight. Now. Eva and Ben were on standby, sitting in the cockpit of their A-10s at the end of the runway, engines humming. The call came through their headsets, sharp and urgent. Hog flight. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Mission is troops and coordinates to follow. Ava's heart began to beat a little faster, but her hands were steady on the controls. This was it. This was not a drill. This was not a training exercise. As she pushed the throttles forward and her Warthog began to roll, she saw Gallo's F-16 land on the parallel runway. He had failed. He had left American soldiers to die because it was too risky. Now it was her turn. She lifted off into the hazy afternoon sky, the desert stretching out below her. She was flying into the hornet's nest. She was flying into the fire, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she would not fail. The men on the ground were counting on the flight to the northern mountains was a race against the setting sun. Eva pushed her A-10, flying low and fast over the barren plains, the landscape below a blur of brown and gray. Her wingman, Ben, held a tight formation off her right wing. The radio was a constant stream of information updates on the ground situation, weather conditions, potential threats. But in Ava's mind, all that noise faded into the background. She was focused on one thing, the voice of the man on the ground. His name was Sergeant Miller, the JTAC for the Green Beret team. His voice was the only link between her world in the sky and their desperate fight in the dirt. It was strained with exhaustion and fear, but it was also clear and professional. He was a man holding it together under unimaginable pressure. Hog flight, be advised. The enemy is dug in on the cliffs to our north and east, Miller said, his words punctuated by the crackle of nearby gunfire. They have heavy machine guns, RPGs. We are pinned down on a small ledge. We have 3 men, wounded, 1 critical. Roger that, Miller, Eva replied, her own voice a stark contrast of calm. We are 5 minutes out. Can you mark your position? Negative. We can't expose ourselves. Any movement draws fire. You'll have to find us. This was the ultimate test of a pilot's skill. No smoke, no laser marker, just a map, a set of coordinates, and a verbal description. In the command center back at FOB Griffin, the room was thick with tension. The ground commander, Colonel Thompson, stood with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the large screen displaying a satellite map of the area. Gallo was there, standing in the back, his arms also crossed, a look of skepticism on his face. He had already declared this mission impossible. He was waiting to be proven right. As Ava's plane crossed into the mountainous region, the world changed. The flat desert gave way to a chaotic jumble of jagged peaks and deep, shadowy canyons. The wind became treacherous, swirling through the narrow valleys. This was no place for a jet. It was a place for a Warthog. Eva slowed her aircraft, dropping her nose to hug the terrain. She flew not over the mountains, but through them, her wingtips seeming to almost scrape the rock walls. Ben followed her every move, his trust in his flight lead absolute. On beginning my search, Eva reported to Miller and the command center. Talk me in. For the next few minutes, an intricate conversation unfolded between the pilot in the sky and the soldier on the ground. Miller described his surroundings with desperate precision. We are on a west-facing ledge, about halfway up the canyon wall. There's a distinctive rock formation that looks like a fist to our south. Eva scanned the endless cliffs. I see a lot of fists down there, Sergeant. Give me something else. There's a waterfall. Well, it's dry now, but you can see the stain on the rock. We're just north of it. Okay, I see the dry waterfall, Eva said, her eyes tracing the dark streak on the cliff face. I think I have you. She spotted them, a tiny cluster of green shapes huddled behind a few pathetic-looking rocks, and then she saw the enemy. Muzzle flashes winked from dozens of small caves and crevices in the cliffs around the soldiers. They were completely surrounded. Miller, I have visual on your position, Eva said. I also have visual on multiple enemy positions. Some of them are extremely close to you. We know, Miller's voice was grim. That's the problem. They're using us as shields. They know you can't drop a bomb without hitting us. This was the moment of truth. This was why Gallo in his F-16 had turned back. A bomb would kill everyone, but Eva wasn't carrying bombs. She was flying a gun. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was designed for surgical precision. It fired 30mm armor-piercing, incendiary rounds. At a rate of 70 rounds per second, it didn't create a wide blast radius. It created a straight line of total devastation exactly where the pilot pointed it. "This is going to be danger close," Miller Eva said, her voice steady. "You need to trust me." There was a pause. The men on the ground knew what she was asking. Danger close was the term for dropping ordnance within a few hundred feet of your own troops. It was the most dangerous and difficult task in air support. "We trust you, Valkyrie," Miller said, his voice filled with a new, desperate hope. "Just get them off us." In the command center, Gallo let out a short, cynical laugh that was quickly silenced by a glare from Colonel Thompson. "She's going to hit them," Gallo muttered to the pilot next to him. "She's going to kill them all." Eva ignored the potential judgment from the rear. Her world had shrunk to her cockpit, her instruments, and the life-or-death geometry of the canyon. "Below, rookie, stay high and watch my back," she ordered Ben. "I'm going in." She rolled her A-10 onto its side and dove into the canyon. The ground rushed up to meet her. The rock walls became a terrifying blur. She leveled out, flying straight down the gut of the valley. The enemy positions were now clearly visible. She could see the faces of the men who were trying to kill the American soldiers. Some of them looked up, their expressions of surprise quickly turning to fear as the Warthog bore down on them. One of them, an officer, even seemed to smirk, confident that she wouldn't dare to fire so close to her own men. That smirk was the last mistake he would ever make. Ava's thumb found the trigger on her control stick. She lined up her first target, a heavy machine gun nest perched on a ledge just above the green beret. She had a window of less than 2 seconds to fire. "Guns, guns, guns," she said calmly into the radio. A standard call to let everyone know she was about to shoot. She squeezed the trigger. The world erupted in the most iconic sound in modern warfare. BRORT. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. The entire aircraft shuddered as the massive cannon unleashed its fury. A stream of tracers, like a laser beam of orange light, shot from the nose of the plane and slammed into the cliff. Face, rock, dust, and shrapnel exploded outwards. The machine gun nest, and the men manning it, simply ceased to exist. Eva pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. She banked sharply and prepared for another run. On the ground, the Green Berets cheered. The relentless fire that had pinned them down had suddenly stopped from that direction. Good hit, Miller yelled into the radio. "You got them. They're running." In the command center, the mood had shifted from skepticism to awe. Gallo's face was a mask of disbelief. He had seen the gun camera footage on the main screen. He had seen the impossible shot she had just made, but it wasn't over. The enemy was well prepared. As Eva lined up for her second pass, a new threat emerged. From a cave on the opposite side of the canyon, a plume of smoke shot into the sky. "Missile launch, missile launch." Ben screamed from his position above. A piercing, high-pitched tone filled Ava's cockpit. The red light of a missile lock warning flashed on her console. A surface-to-air missile, a SAM, was screaming towards her. She had seconds to react. The missile was a streak of white smoke, a messenger of death closing the distance with terrifying speed. The canyon that had been her hunting ground had just become a trap. The shrill, unrelenting scream of the missile lock alarm was the sound of impending death. For most pilots, in most aircraft, it would have been the end, but the A-10 Warthog was not most aircraft, and Eva Rostova was not most pilots. Instinct took over. She didn't have time to think, only to act. She yanked the control stick hard to the right, pushing the rugged airframe to its limits. The plane groaned in protest, but it responded. Simultaneously, her thumb jammed down on the countermeasures button. The sky behind her lit up as the A-10 spat out a brilliant cloud of flares, dazzling balls of magnesium designed to fool the missile's heat-seeking guidance system. The missile, confused by the sudden bloom of a dozen false suns, swerved. It shot past her wing, so close she could feel the vibration of its passage through the air. It slammed into the canyon wall behind her, a fiery explosion that sent rock and debris raining down into the valley. She had survived, but she was not unscathed. A volley of ground fire from a different enemy position had raked across her left wing and engine as she evaded the missile. The cockpit, Her titanium bathtub had protected her, but her plane was hurt. Red and amber warning lights flashed across her instrument panel like angry eyes. An automated voice, calm and robotic, began listing the damage. Warning, left engine fire. Warning, hydraulic system failure. Valkyrie, you're hit, you're trailing smoke. Ben's voice was frantic in her headset. Eva fought to control the aircraft. The A-10 was famously tough. It was designed to take a beating and keep flying. It had redundant systems, manual backups, but this was serious. The controls felt sluggish, like she was trying to steer a boat through mud. The left engine was dead, and she was losing hydraulic fluid fast. Without hydraulics, controlling the plane's flight surfaces, the ailerons, the rudder, the elevators would become nearly impossible. I'm okay, rookie, she said, her voice strained as she wrestled with the controls. Left engine is out. I'm losing fluid, but she's still flying. You need to get out of there, Ben urged. Head for home. That's an order. Valkyrie, RTB. Return to base. Back at the FOB, Colonel Thompson and the entire command center had watched the gun camera footage in horrified silence. They had seen the missile launch, the violent evasion, the flash of impacts on her wing. Get her back here, the colonel ordered the air controller. Tell her to disengage and return immediately. The call went out. Hog, 221, you are ordered to disengage. Return to base now. Eva heard the orders, she understood them. Her training, her instincts, her own sense of self-preservation all screamed at her to obey. To turn her crippled plane towards the safety of the FOB, but then she heard another voice on the radio. It was Sergeant Miller, from the ground. His voice was no longer filled with hope, but with renewed panic. They're coming. The enemy. They're regrouping. They're coming out of the caves. They know you're hit. They're going to overrun us. Eva looked down, she could see them. Dozens of enemy fighters, emboldened by the sight of her smoking aircraft, were swarming out of their hiding places, charging towards the small group of Green Berets. The soldiers wouldn't last 5 minutes. In that moment, Eva made a choice. It wasn't a choice between obeying an order and disobeying one. It was a choice between her own life and the lives of the men on that ridge. She thought of her father, the steelworker who had taught her that you never walk away from a job until it's done. She thought of Sarge, who said the plane was a promise, that we never abandon our own. She took a deep breath. Negative, she said into the radio, her voice suddenly clear and strong, cutting through the panic. I am not leaving, I'm going back in. A stunned silence fell over the radio channel. In the command center, Gallo stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was reckless. It was suicide. Valkyrie, do not engage, the controller ordered. I'm the only one who can help them, Eva replied, her decision made. Rookie, stay high and keep an eye out for any more SAMs. I'm taking care of the trash. She turned the wounded Warthog back towards the fight. The plane shuddered and groaned. The controls were heavy, unresponsive. She was flying on one engine and a prayer, but her eyes were clear, her hands were steady. She was no longer just a pilot, she was a shield. She dove back into the canyon, the alarms in her cockpit screaming a symphony of failure. She ignored them. She saw the wave of enemy fighters scrambling. Up the rocks towards the Green Berets, she lined up the shot. This was not about precision anymore. This was about annihilation. She unleashed everything she had left. She fired her remaining rockets, which streaked into the clusters of enemy soldiers, sending them flying. Then, she opened up with the cannon one last time. BRRRT. She raked the hillside with a long, sustained burst, walking the stream of 30mm shells across the enemy's line of advance. The ground erupted. The charge faltered, then broke. The enemy fighters, those who were still alive, scrambled back towards the safety of their caves. She had done it. She had broken the attack. She pulled up, her plane struggling for every inch of altitude. The fight was gone from her. Her only thought now was survival. Miller, she said, her voice barely a whisper. How are you doing down there? There was a pause, and then the sergeant's voice came back, thick with emotion and awe. They're gone, Valkyrie. They're all gone. You did it. You saved us. God bless you, Hog 221. You saved us all. In the command center, a wave of relief washed over the room. They had witnessed something extraordinary, an act of bravery that went beyond the call of duty. Colonel Thompson took off his hat and wiped his brow, a slow smile spreading across his face. Gallo just stood there, pale and silent, his arrogance shattered. He had seen what true courage looked like, and he knew, in that moment, that he did not possess it. Eva finally turned her battered plane towards home. The journey back was a lonely, terrifying battle against gravity and mechanical failure. The plane was dying. She was fighting the controls with all her strength, but she was losing altitude. The desert floor seemed to be rising up to meet her. FOB was still miles away, a distant smudge on the horizon. She knew she wasn't going to make it. She keyed her microphone one last time. Her voice was strained, but it was without panic. It was the voice of a professional, doing her job until the very end. Mayday, 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 she broadcast to the silent, listening world. This is Hog 221. Controls are unresponsive. I'm losing altitude. I am not going to make it back to the field. There was a pause as she fought the stick one last time, trying to keep the nose up. Valkyrie is going down. The final moments of the flight were a blur of screaming alarms and a desperate fight against a dying machine. Eva didn't try to save the plane anymore. She just tried to guide its fall. Her goal was to get as close to the FOB's perimeter as she could, to make it easier for the rescue teams. With her last ounce of strength, she kept the wings level and aimed for a flat stretch of sand, away from the rocks and ravines that littered the desert. The impact was violent. The Warthog, a plane built to survive, hit the ground hard, its reinforced landing gear collapsing on impact. It skidded for hundreds of yards, shedding pieces of its wings and tail, a cloud of sand and smoke billowing behind it. It finally came to a shuddering halt, a broken but defiant metal beast, silent in the vast desert. Inside the cockpit, Eva was thrown against her straps, her helmet hitting the canopy. Then there was silence, broken only by the hiss of leaking fluid and the whisper of the wind. Back at FOB Griffin, the crash alarm blared. Rescue helicopters were already lifting off, their rotors beating the dusty air. The entire base held its breath. They had all heard her last call. They had all watched her flight path disappear from the radar screen. The rescue team found her conscious, but dazed. They had to cut through the thick canopy to get her out. She had a broken arm, a concussion, and a dozen cuts and bruises, but she was alive. The titanium bathtub had done its job. As they flew her back to the base hospital, she looked down at the wreckage of her plane, a pang of sadness mixing with her relief. It had been a good plane. It had brought her home. While Eva was being treated, the wheels of military procedure were already turning. The gun camera footage from her A-10 was recovered from the wreckage. It was standard procedure, part of the after-action report. The intelligence officers gathered to review it, expecting to simply confirm the details of her heroic actions. What they found would shake the entire command. Structure of the FOB. The footage was even more incredible than they had imagined. It showed Ava's calm professionalism, her pinpoint accuracy, her impossible courage. But as they slowed down, the footage from her final, desperate gun run, an intelligence analyst leaned closer to the screen. "Wait a minute," he said. "Go back. Right there." Zoom in. They focused on a frame from the moment before her cannon fire had torn the hillside. Apart, it showed the enemy fighters swarming up the rocks. And directing them, standing on a high ledge, was a man with a distinctive beard and a radio. He was a notorious insurgent commander, a high-value target who had been on the coalition's kill or capture list for months. Eva had, in her final act of defiance, eliminated one of the most wanted men in the region. But that wasn't the twist. The analyst pointed to another figure, standing right next to the insurgent commander. He was a local man, an informant who had been providing intelligence to the coalition forces. His name was Tariq. He was supposed to be an asset, a friend, and he was standing there, in the heart of the enemy ambush, clearly complicit. The analyst's blood ran cold. "That's Tariq," he whispered. "He's the one who gave Major Gallo the intel for the F-16 strike." Suddenly, it all made sense. The Green Berets had been led into a perfectly prepared trap. The intelligence that had sent them on that mission was a lie. The information given to Gallo, which had led him to believe the main threat was miles away, was deliberately false, designed to keep the F-16s away from the real ambush site. An investigation was launched immediately. It was quiet, swift, and ruthless. They reviewed Gallo's contact logs and debriefing reports. It became clear that Gallo, in his arrogant pursuit of a glorious high-altitude strike, had relied exclusively on Tariq's information. He had dismissed warnings from other intelligence sources that the informant was unreliable. He had wanted the intel to be true because it promised him an easy, impressive mission. He wasn't a traitor, but his arrogance and poor judgment had made him the enemy's most effective pawn. He had been so eager to prove the superiority of his F-16 that he had led his own side into a disaster. Major Rick Hotshot Gallo was quietly relieved of his command and flown out of the country to face a board of inquiry. His career was over. His swagger was gone. replaced by the hollow look of a man who had been completely and utterly disgraced. Eva, meanwhile, was recovering. The story of her flight, and the truth it had uncovered, spread like wildfire through the base. She was no longer just the female pilot. She was Valkyrie, the pilot who flew her crippled plane back into the fire to save her comrades. She was a hero. When she was finally released from the hospital, her arm in a sling, she walked into the officers' club. The room, once the scene of her humiliation, fell silent. Every pilot in the room, from the F-16 squadron and her own, stood up. They didn't say anything, they just started to applaud. It was a wave of sound, a thunder of respect that washed over her. The men from the Green Beret team she had saved were there, and their leader, Sergeant Miller, walked up to her and gave her a salute. "We owe you our lives, Captain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Eva, a woman of few words, just nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She saw Sarge standing in the back, a proud, watery smile on his face. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. But months later, Eva was back at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The sun was just as hot, the sky just as blue, but everything was different. She was no longer just Captain Rostova. She was Major Rostova, the new leader of the A-10 squadron. She had been awarded the Air Force Cross for her heroism. The story ended where it began, on the flight line. Eva stood before a group of new pilots, both men and women, briefing them. Before a training flight, her voice was no longer quiet and hesitant. It was confident, calm, and full of authority. "Your job is not about glory," she told them, her eyes sweeping over their young, eager faces. "It's not about being the fastest or the highest. It's about the soldier on the ground. He is your mission. Never forget that." She dismissed them and watched as they headed for their planes. Her gaze fell on a brand new A-10 Warthog parked in the spot where her old plane, number 237, used to be. It was a plane as tough, as resilient, and as underestimated as she had once been. A small, confident smile touched her lips. The enemy had smirked, confident in their trap, but they hadn't counted on the quiet woman in the ugly airplane. They hadn't counted on the grit of the Warthog, or the steel of the Valkyrie who flew it. In one single, defiant sweep, she had silenced them all, and in doing so she had found her own voice.